Hi there, welcome back to Cloud with Aarya. Today we are going to understand how can we monitor a single or few VMs for CPU, memory and disk space in our Azure environment. So sometimes people want an easier way to add VMs to monitoring without understanding or using DCR or log analytic workspace, or which can be sometimes complex for new people who are just starting out with Azure. Now, this DCR are solutions when we want to add multiple VMs at scale for monitoring, and we have already covered this topic on another video which you can see in the above link. And in this video, let's start with understanding how can we do it for a single or few VMs. Now, this solution is best when we have only few VMs in our environment, but when we are working with a large scale and VMs more than 20, and it's not easier manage these alerts separately. Instead, create a DCR and use that to automatically include your workloads whenever any new virtual machine is added or you have a lot of VMs. Now, to understand this in detail, let's start with understanding the components of a VM. So I'll use the Azure Virtual Machine first. So when we use Azure Virtual Machines in a VM, we have a lot of components that are attached to it, like a network interface card or a disk. So NIC provides you the connectivity to your VMs, your private IP and your public IP gets attached to it. And all the data filter, your security rules are evaluated from your NIC, whatever NSG you have applied. And then we have the disk attached to the VM, right? So it can be a OS disk or multiple data disk attached to it, right? Now this will be your OS disk. Every VM has one OS disk attached to it. Then we can have is a data disk 1 and data disk 2. When we talk about OS disk, for Windows we have C drive and for Linux we have slash, right? Similarly for data disk we have in Windows we can have EF drive similarly, or in Linux we can have slash DB. Similarly in data disk 2 we can have F drive, and in Linux it can be any mount point. I'm just taking an example like slash app. So these are the scenarios in any virtual machines, either a Windows or a Linux. We can have multiple disk. We always have an OS which can be C slash mount point, or in another disk we can have a E drive and slash DB as a mount point. And whenever we create a VM in Azure, we always choose a SKU also, and SKU is just a size of the VM like B2S, which basically will define your CPU and memory, what it's going to be, and it supports a lot of other functionality, whether your VM is going to have a temporary storage, how many NICs you can attach in a single VM, your IOPS and throughput. And in this example it's going to give you two virtual CPUs and 4 gigabytes of memory. So these are all the components that gets attached to your VM, and whenever we are using VM, we are basically hosting our applications or our database. It can be any use case, but at any point of time, we are always going to monitor some of the few metrics like your CPU and memory, your data disk and OS disk, because whenever the utilization of your VM gets used to its full potential, like in this case if the VM uses the entire CPU and over 4 gigabytes of memory, or your OS disk is completely utilized, your VM is gonna get stuck and you won't be able to access your VM. Instead of Azure automatically taking those actions, making your VM stuck or unavailable, we always set up alerts so that whenever this kind of situation happens, we proactively monitor and can take action before our application goes down. So in a portal, when we go to an Azure VM, so we saw here our queue, our disk and NIC. So let's check that on Azure VM. The queue is the size of your VM. Like in this case, I've opted B1S, which is one CPU and 1 gigabytes of memory. And then we have is a disk, which is right here. And also we have a network interface card, which we can see in the network settings, right? So this is the network interface card where all your network flow is happening. Now this was just a basics to understand what we are actually trying to monitor. And now we'll see how can we set up alerts on them. And this can be done when we are creating a virtual machines plus after creating a virtual machines too. So in the first scenario, let's cover when we are creating a virtual machines. Let's create one, give a subscription. I'll give a resource group and give a name Azure VM Alerts Windows. Now I'm going to use Central India and availability is on no. And security type standard, image I'll use Windows, and I'm going to use the size of the VM less because I do not want a heavy bill on my invoice next month. So I'll stick with B1S, which gives me one CPU and 1 gigabytes of memory, and it will cost me 923 per month. Give a username and password. I'll add RDP. I'll go to next. I'll change it to standard STD, which is going to cost me less. And networking, I'll keep it default. Next, management, also default. And in monitoring, we can see we have an option of alert rules configure. Now we see our various options. Before understanding this, I'll go back and let's add. Now CPU and memory is a metric alert. So whenever you create a virtual machines, you get a built-in monitoring for metric for this alert. And for disk space, you have to enable VM Insights feature in Azure VM. So when I say these are metric alerts, meaning when the VM is created, these we can directly monitor from the start. We do not have to add any other solutions on our VM and add alerts also. Whereas in disk space, we have to enable VM Insights feature, which we are going to see later. So you can see we have an inbuilt support for CPU and a memory, and we can monitor all these options as well: data disk IOPS, OS disk IOPS, and network in and out from your network interface card by setting those values here. And other we have is a VM availability metric, which will basically alert you whenever your VM will goes down. So for now, I want to set up an alert whenever the CPU goes above 90. And the second is for memory, and the value I'll give is 500 MB 0.5, which will basically mean 500 MB. And I'll not set up data disk IOPS and network out, and VM availability I'll set to 1. So whenever your VM goes down, your value will go to 0 and it will notify you. And the next we can choose is how we want to get notified. I have already selected my email. So alert will get triggered to this email whenever these threshold limits are breached, or I can use an existing action group as well and then click on save. So I've set up CPU, memory alerts and the availability metrics. So whenever the VM goes down, I'll receive the alert, and then I'll click on next review and create. And this is how we set up an alert whenever we are creating a VM. And now let's check after the VM is created, how can we add it or add more alerts to it. So you can see here what are the various components that are being created when we are creating a VM. So one is your virtual machine itself, then is a network interface card, then this is your NIC, your alerts action group, your public IP address, your NSC that is going to get attached to your NIC. Let's add one important alerts for any organization who have their workloads on VMs are CPU, your memory, disk space, VM up, down, mount points, Linux. Right, so the VM is created. Now in the left side of the VM, go to metrics. So you can see the scope is selected as your VM. Your namespace is your virtual machine host, and then is your metric. Metrics are the performance and health measurements collected for your Azure virtual machines, and this helps you to monitor the usage, the performance, and availability of your VM. Now, when we go inside, we have various metrics that we get inbuilt from the Azure. So we have a lot of these options which can help you to monitor your VM and set up alerts on them. But important ones, as I mentioned here, are CPU, memory, disk space, VM up, down, your mount point, and it can be more the kind of workload you are running, right? So for example, if I click on available memory percentage, it's still loading because it's a new VM. It's going to take some time to reflect the data. Let's click on refresh. Yeah. So you can see our VM has 7% of available memory present, meaning it's utilized up to 93%. And for all the alerts we set up, we can see in the alert section, right? So we can see the alert is fired for memory bytes, because as we just saw, the available memory bytes is just 7%, meaning we have 1 gigabytes of memory and the available is only just 7%. And we set up the alert on the threshold 500 MB and it fired because it is less than 500. So these are the fired alerts. Now to see the alert which we have set up, we will go to alert rules and we'll see three alerts. One is for CPU, one is for your memory, and one is your availability, right? And this is the main drawback which I find when we are creating alerts individually for your VMs instead of using data collections rule, DCR. The benefit with DCR is we just create one alert for CPU, memory, or disk space, and it will monitor multiple virtual machines, and you won't have to create a lot of alerts. In this case, this is just a one VM, and suppose you are monitoring 10 VM by this way, you would have easily 20 to 25 alerts. So this solution is not scalable when you have a lot of virtual machines, and the best is to use the data collection rule. Now we have set up alerts for the CPU and memory while we created the VM. Now let's delete those alerts and let's create new ones from the VM blade. So now let's go to your virtual machines, and your left side scroll down to metrics, and we'll cover the CPU, memory, and disk space for our VMs. So first I'll go to percentage CPU, and aggregation will be average, and you can see the graph here as well. The utilization right now is around 34%, and I'll click on new alert rule. So in the scope, you can see this VM is already selected, and I'll just add the conditions like whenever the CPU goes up, usually it's 90, but to fire an alert, I'll set up the threshold 30. The CPU of the VM is around 34%, and I've set up 30, meaning it will throw the alert. And then I'll go to next action, and I'll use action group and create one. VM monitoring. To make it better understandable, I can use the VM name, window VM. You can specify here, and next notification. Here I'll go to email SMS. I want to get notified by email, and I'll give a test name and specify my email. Right, so you have various options. You can use SMS also. You can use Azure mobile app notification, your voice. This will call you in your mobile number, and I'll click on OK and then review and create. So with this, action group will get created, and you can use this action group for other alerts as well. Click on create. So you can see my action group is selected, and I'll go to next detail. The subscription where the alert role will get created, and the resource group. You can select the severity according to the criticality of your VM, whether it's a production, dev test, or any kind of environment. Select critical, error warning, informational, right? So I'll select critical, and in the alert rule name, I'll specify CPU is high for window VM above 30%. Right, and I'll enable upon creation and automatically resolve alerts, and when the threshold doesn't match with the alert rule, it will automatically resolve alert. Review and create. So now when this alert rule will get created, I'll automatically get alert because the current utilization of the CPU is at 34%, and I've set up the threshold for 30%. Next we'll set up alert from memory, and for memory we have the latest option which we did not had earlier, and for that we had to use earlier logging to set up these kind of alert, but now we have got available memory percentage, which will automatically get the percentage of your memory, and we can set up alert on that. And for this we'll use aggregation average, and value will use less than because it's available, so I'll use less than or equal to. In this case, our available memory for our VM is around 15% only, and to get an alert right now it's 15, so I would have to use 16 or 17 or 20 to fire an alert, but I'll just specify whenever the memory goes beyond less than 10%, I will get an alert. And when I'll specify this number, you will see this black line over there, right? So you can see the black line is now at 10%. So next I can use check every 1 minute. So this alert will run every 1 minute to check if the value is not below 10, and the loopback period is always greater than your check every. We do not match it with the loopback period because in that case sometimes we may have false positives, so we always keep the loopback period more than your frequency of your alert. Next I'll click on action, and I will use the existing action group which we just created, VM monitoring, right? And I'll click on next details. I can use critical, and I'll use alert rule name high memory Windows VM, right? And next tag and review and create. So we have created two alerts, CPU and memory. Now the next alert which we are going to work upon is the disk space alerts. Now the CPU and memory were the metric alerts, meaning we can find them directly in the virtual machines blade and in the metric, but we won't find the disk space utilization metric directly in here. For that we have to enable logging or Azure Insights, this option. The difference between the metric and log alerts is metrics are directly emitted from the Azure platform itself, but logging, what happens is the agent gets installed on the VM, and then that agent from inside the VM fetches your disk space, and then it sends it to a log analytic workspace, and the log analytic workspace is just a storehouse for your log, and you run the KQL queries to query your data and set up alerts on that. So now to get this data, go to insights and then enable, and in here I'll specify the subscription and the data collection rule and configure. right? So it will take a few minutes to deploy. Meanwhile, I've already created another VM which is Linux. I've already enabled the insights feature on it. When this gets enabled, you can go to the performance, and the performance will find the disk utilization. We can find various other options as well. We can see the disk utilization of the root mount points slash boot slash mnt, all other partitions inside the Linux VM, right? So we also have the visibility on the CPU, your available memory, your logical disk IOPS. The important thing is we get this current size, how much the disk is getting utilized. So in this we can see the slash is 28 and currently it's being utilized at 9%. Now to set up an alert on this, we have to go to logs, and when we enable this VM insights, as I told, our agent gets installed, and to see that agent we'll go to extension and application, and that is Azure Monitor Linux agent. We have covered a lot of videos on this agent and how it works, the DCR. I'll mention the video details in the description if you want to check it out, right? So a agent gets installed on it, and then that agent will send the data to the log analytic workspace. So we can see the DCR data collection rule we have is this one, and the workspace is, so this works together. So the agent installed on the VMs works with the data collection rules to send the data to the log analytic workspace. And to set up an alert on this, we'll go to the log, and in the logs we will use the KQL to query our data which is sent to the workspace, and I'll run this particular query. Also, I'll add the query in the description side so you can check that out and use in your testing. So in this case, what we have to do is you have the insight metrics table. You want to see what table is this. Table gets created at the log analytic workspace side. So when I go to the log analytic workspace and in the tables, right? So you would have this particular insight metrics table there, which is sending data. And in this particular table, all your data is being stored, right? You see here. Now when we go back, when we ran this query, it fetched these records, and these are logs from inside the VM. So this is a Linux VM. We do not require C in here, so I'll remove C, and I can add disk according to our needs, like slash mnt, right? So we can see the disk here, slash and slash mnt, and it's showing the percentage of the free space available. So in the slash we have 90% available, and the mnt we have the 99% available on our disk. And now to set up alert on this, we'll go to three dots and click on new alert rule. And here the signal name instead of metric will now become custom log search. I'll check the aggregation granularity to 15 minutes, meaning our data will be grouped for evaluation for every 15 minutes. And I can use a split by dimension, which will basically segregate our VM. Like in this case, if you would have multiple VMs, we can segregate our VMs like Azure VM Alerts. And here we can specify the operator because we are using the free space percentage, so we'll use less than or equal to threshold value 10. Whenever the disk space goes beyond 10%, it will trigger an alert and I'll get notified, and then I'll go to next action. I can use existing one, and then next detail root disk space less than 10%, right? And can go to next tag and review and create. So this is how we can set up disk space monitoring for Linux for a single VM. And similarly, while it's getting created, we'll go to our Windows VM alerts where we just enabled Azure VM Insights, and in that also the ingestion of data would have started, and we could see the C drive and the D drive data also, right? So we can see the C drive is 9% utilized and the D is just 13%, right? So to set up an alert on this, the Azure Windows agent would have been installed on this one also when we enable the VM Insight. And set up disk monitoring, we'll go to logs, and similarly I'll go to KQL mode and I'll run this query, and this will fetch me C drive. I'll add D drive also and run it. So as I just enabled VM Insights, it's going to take some time to fetch the data from the VM and store it in the log analytic workspace. So I'll just give so it can show some data. Meanwhile, we show CPU memory and disk space, and let's check the VM up down alert. For the VM up down alerts, we have an option of resource health alerts. For that, we can go to help and support and then click on this. Here we have an option of service health, and then you see the resource health, and now I'll click on add resource health alert, and in here we can see the event status, active, in progress, resolved, updated. So whenever any this kind of activity happens on our VM, we'll get notified. In the scope, I'll select the resource type to just my virtual machines, and we can select multiple VMs here, and when any kind of activity happens, can be like whenever the VM is stopped from our side or from Azure side, whenever there is a maintenance or a hardware failure happens, we'll get notified. we'll see the reason in those alerts with platform initiated or unknown or user initiated. Next action will I'll choose the existing action group and I'll go to next detail. I'll say resource health alert. VM down, and I'll go to next tag and review and create. So this is the one way which we can set up our alert for whenever a VM goes down or is rebooted. Another way is to go to your VM and we have one VM availability metric. So you can see here it's either 0 or 1. So 1 is when your VM is up and 0 is when your VM is stopped from the portal or from the operating system. Now for this to set up an alert, I can go to new alert rule and I'll select the aggregation type to less than 1, meaning whenever it will go 1, I'll get notified. Basically, our VM is not accessible or has been shut down. So for next, I'll go to next action. I can add the existing action group and then next details and then review and create. So we have covered CPU, memory, VM up, down and mount. For disk space taking some time. Meanwhile, you can see here, right? Whenever we are using a few VMs like 2 or 5 or 6 VMs and we do not want to go the hassle of creating the data collection rule and configuring that and understanding that how that works, we can utilize this. But for a large scale environments, whenever we have a lot of virtual machines, this solution is not scalable and it will become very complex to manage all those alerts. So best solution is to use the data collection rule, which will help you to monitor the VMs easily. So you can see we have the data C and D drive and we can see the free space percentage. Like for C drive we have 90% and for D we have 86% available to use. Similarly, to set up an alert on this, I'll copy the query and I'll go to new alert rule. I'll keep everything same and paste my query here and I'll use the aggregation granularity 15 minutes. I can select the resource ID, my VM. Scroll below threshold value, it's for less than or equal to, because the metric is free space percentage. I want to get notified whenever free space goes beyond 10, right? And I'll click on next action and I'll use existing action group. Click on select next details and I paste utilization, right? Control V, next tag and review and create. So this is how we create an alert for a single VM, and we covered CPU, memory, disk space and VM up down alert are almost for all organizations are the important or the basics one which we utilize. And to see one of the alert which we created for the CPU, which must have got fired for our Windows VM, because you can see in the status also it because the CPU was high on the VM. So let's go to the Gmail and check if we have received an alert. So you can see the alert which we set up for this high CPU for above 30%, and we received an alert with the alert rule name and the description which is set up, and we can see the resource ID which will specify our VM name, and we can see the status. Also after few minutes the alert got deactivated. So we have received a deactivated alert also, because in the alert rule we specify the auto resolve status, and this is how this works. Alright, so this was all for this video, and all important links, documents and the query I will attach in the description. So please check that out and see you in the next one. Thank you.